When application completion rates drop, something is off. Students aren't getting the support they need, and that's affecting your numbers. Enter Element 451's AI assistants. They step in where students struggle, offering real-time answers and advice, guiding them through every step. Learn how AI assistants can boost your enrollment outcomes. Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to Breaking Silos, a podcast that shines a light on the incredible partnerships happening across campuses every day. I'm your host, Shane Baglini from Muhlenberg College. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing, enrollment management, student affairs, campus leadership, and more. Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome to Breaking Silos again, and I'm very excited about this conversation today. My guest today is Terry Flannery. She's the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at CASE. She's also the author of How to Market a University and the host of How to Market a University here on Enrollify, and is one of the world's leading university marketing professionals. Hi, Terry.
Hey, Shane. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks so much for joining me. And I want to dive right in here, Terry, because I have so much to cover with you. But I want to start kind of at a high level with, your career has spanned quite a bit of time and high-profile institutions. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how throughout your career have opinions and attitudes about marketing changed on campuses, and where is there still work left to do?
Yeah, I'd say it's 180-degree change over when I first started. So let me take you back to 1997 when I was offered the position of the first marketing director at my alma mater, where the position was one-person shop with an operating budget of $48,000 a year and not even an administrative assistant. And the job was peers with the news director and the publication director, and anticipated that the primary role would be coordinating the messages of the deans. So I knew then, and said so, that I really thought that they didn't understand what the term marketing meant or how it could help the institution, and that I would help them find somebody else in the role if they were interested in sort of better, more integrated promotion, but I wasn't really interested. And they came back to me a few weeks later and said, well, what do you think it would take? And within months, I had the role and was actually leading the work of all of the marketing communication functions, which then started to allocate resources to a more strategic marketing and communications function. But we could never say the word marketing in front of faculty. We certainly didn't use the B word. And it was really a process of educating people in higher ed about what marketing really meant and how it could be useful or valuable. And that was quite a task. Fast forward now 40 years, hard to believe it's been 4 decades in the work. But the not since 1997, but in my time in higher education, the attitude is really one where leaders are hungry to understand how to resource, how to organize, and how to measure the work that we do. And they realize it's central to their success. It's often in their presidential positioning statements, and very anxious to see how to do this well. So we're in demand. There's still a lot of work to do about best understanding what real strategic marketing looks like, but we've come a long, long way.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks for that background. We'll get into measurement a little bit later when we talk about CASE's new report. But I also want to ask you about, in your experience, what have been some of the critical factors in creating some of the silos that we experience as higher ed marcom professionals in our daily role, and how can we address those silos by really elevating our work on campus?
Yeah. I have a colleague, Scott Bass, who was the provost at American University when I was there as VP for Marketing and Communication. And he pointed out that he thought that the siloing was really a function of the way that higher education developed in this country and other countries, and that it's really based on the model for faculty, where they have discipline-specific identities and professional associations that are related to their particular academic discipline with their own standards, their own practices, their own journal, et cetera. And actually, professionals in higher education have modeled that same kind of identification. And so if you're in student affairs, you might belong to NASPA or ACPA and subscribe to their standards and their benchmarks and their best practices. If you're in marketing communications in this country, you might belong to the AMA or to CASE or other organizations in other countries. But that ends up with a lack of common understanding about how the strategic work at an institution should be achieved and how it should be organized and measured. So you end up with this very natural breaking apart and decentralized organizational structure that you then have to fight to integrate in certain ways. And by fight, I mean just the natural conflict that introduces.
Yeah. And can you speak a little bit, Terry, about the importance of marketing? We hear the term a seat at the table quite often. Can you speak a little bit on the importance of that and having marketing in that cabinet level senior role?
Yep, it's huge. And it took decades to get here, but we're here. So the data shows that in a majority of cases, that seat at the leadership table exists for the chief marketing and communication officer at an institution, and often reports directly to the president or CEO or vice chancellor, whatever term it is that you use for your leader at your institution. That seat comes with both responsibility and opportunity. So the responsibility is when you're sitting at the table that you are not just playing the role for your leading your silo, and you make sure you challenge any misunderstandings about the work and what it's really about. So two different things to do there. The decisions that get made there are about strategy, right? And you should not just limit your comments or the person who's in that role to things that strictly are in the sphere of the marketing communications space, whether it's promoting a new program or thinking about a particular issue to be managed and how to communicate about it. You're at the table because you should be influencing the decision in the first place, not just deciding how to report it out or communicate about it. So you really have to act like there's an old Tom Landry quote. You know Tom Landry, the Dallas Cowboys fan?
I do, yeah.
He had an expression that he would tell young players: when you get in the end zone, act like you know you've been there before, right? Yeah. So you have to go in with embodying this confidence. I'm a leader that has the ability to contribute across the sphere of things. Moreover, the strategy involved in marketing suggests that if our purpose is not just to influence promotion, but to influence price, product, place, then you should be participating in conversations about shaping the student and employee experience. You have a role to play in that. You probably have data that is related to informing decisions about that. If you're thinking about how to best position the institution to better meet the need for a particular target audience, obviously you have a role in that discussion, but it shouldn't just be shaped by, a new program will be decided by the provost, or a particular pricing action should be determined by the budget office or the CFO. You have a role to play in that. So embodying that role at the table is really, really important. And then making sure that you don't get pigeonholed in just a misunderstanding of your role as strictly about promotion. You have to educate your colleagues at the leadership table about all the things that marketing is designed to do to build value for the institution in terms of revenue, reputation, and relationships.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Terry. That's, it's great advice. And I'm glad that you sort of named the 4 Ps there, because I think a lot of us would say that is one of the biggest misunderstandings about marketing, is that we can influence the product, price, place, and we know our audience's needs and wants better than most. And so it's really important. And so thanks for that advice. I want to dive into measurement, which you mentioned before, and specifically talking about CASE's new report. It's called A Framework for Brand Reputation and Metrics in Education, and it highlights the importance of measurement across campus. So can you give us an overview of the report, and why is it such a critical tool for marketers, and not only marketers, but for universities as a whole?
Yep. It's a really important first step in a journey to have specific measures of performance for marketing communications professionals in education, and to eventually establish benchmarks against which we can compare ourselves in our institution's performance. And they don't exist in education at all. They exist in other sectors. We brought a group of thought leaders together that I know we'll talk more about to shape this framework. And so the report is really just outlining what the framework is. And it identifies 6 categories of marketing communications activity that include work on brand and work on reputation, more specifically through strategic communications, but also include the work in specific areas that might be delegated to other parts of the institution, like alumni engagement, like philanthropy, like external affairs, like crisis management. So you take these 6 categories of activity and name the levels of measurement in each of those 6 categories. There's 3 levels of measurement that become increasingly more sophisticated across time, for lack of a better word. And what we're trying to convey with these 6 categories of activity and 3 levels of measurement is that you should think about where to start your measurement based on your readiness. And for some institutions that understand the purpose of marketing as primarily promotional and may not have the investment in resources like marketing technology, they may only be able to do some basic reporting, which is okay. That's a good place to start, right? But as your institution becomes increasingly more sophisticated about the purpose of marketing and communications as strategic, not just tactical promotion, and as you invest in more marketing technology to do what you need to do, you'll be able to do more data analysis and go to the level of most sophisticated measurement, which is insights. And in this report, we've identified a series of exemplary measures that fall into each category of activity and each level of measurement. And maybe you can put in your show notes a link to the report so people can see it. What we're doing now is saying, if this is the framework, then what are some examples of measures you use and where do you think it falls in this matrix? And we're crowdsourcing that collection of exemplary measures so that the next step, which will be to choose which measures we start with, we'll then define those in a very specific way and provide an opportunity for institutions to start reporting, a pilot group of institutions to start reporting on those measures. It's a first step in eventually having much more data, many more measures, and the ability to benchmark your performance against peers.
Hey, it's Shane, and I'm excited to tell you that Element 451 is hosting the AI Engage Summit on October 29th and 30th. This free virtual event features many of your favorite Enrollify creators and will explore AI's impact on student engagement, enrollment marketing, and institutional success. Learn to tap into AI to automate personalized outreach, improve your emails, streamline content creation, and boost campaign performance. Plus, hear directly from current students on how AI is influencing their engagement and campus life. The AI Engage Summit is your guide to understanding and applying AI at your school. Registration is free, so visit element451.com to save your spot. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and yes, look in the show notes because there will be a link to the report. And Terry, you mentioned the thought leadership group, which you'll find in the report. There's a very impressive group of folks, a lot of folks that I admire a lot. As you all work together and progress through this process, what themes emerged in your discussions about levels of readiness across institutions for this type of measurement?
Yeah. Well, the reason that cases had trouble trying to do this twice before is that we couldn't surmount the differences in readiness at different institutions because of scale or the way that you're organized. And this time we think we've cracked that nut because we've given a kind of a continuum of readiness that doesn't apply judgment that one is better than the other. It's where you are, finding where you are and then thinking about where to start your measurement based on where you are. The group of thought leaders also had to contend with something that would apply to all of CASE's members. So it has in this thought leadership group, people from 3 of the 4 CASE regions that CASE operates in globally. So it's globally relevant. Mm-hmm. It includes people from both independent schools and universities, large and small institutions. It includes practitioners as well as agency leads, and it includes people whose expertise is more aligned with marketing and more aligned with communications. So we've developed something that holistically applies to that whole group, which I think is going to be really, really important to making it relevant.
Yeah, that's great. And I've read the report, and it's a really nice framework for an institution like Muhlenberg, where we have a small team, but it feels that this work is approachable, and so that I really appreciated that about the report and the framework in and of itself, because I feel like I can start this with what I have on hand, and that's exciting.
Yep, great. Well, I expect an example of a measure from you from Muhlenberg.
Absolutely.
Pricing.
Definitely. So, measurement, I think we all aspire to certain levels of measurement in the work that we're doing. I think it's kind of a moving target for some of us, but why is institutional measurement so crucial across all of these functions? And how does this framework specifically enhance sort of a natural collaboration across campuses and departments?
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to help with a couple of different challenges. One is that, like I said, leaders are really hungry to know how to do this well, and they need some resource to kind of validate this is how you should do it, and here's how to measure the effectiveness. Here's what it requires to invest in this work, and how you'd measure return on an investment. We've socialized this framework at 3 different case meetings so far this year, and resoundingly we heard, this is going to give me legitimacy. This is going to help me build confidence with my leaders. This is a game changer for helping to show leaders on our campus how our work should be organized and how it should be measured. And it's not completely comprehensive, but it's a big enough start, really, that there's an opportunity to, dig in and find your place here. So I think this is an opportunity to create the kind of credibility for our work and a roadmap for, if we invest in this work, how would we track the return on that investment? And how will we know what's working and what's not, so that we can take what we have invested and invest that in the things that are working most successfully?
Yeah.
It's that kind of confidence,
Yeah, and a follow-up question kind of along those lines, Terry, would be, and just thinking about my own role and some of my colleagues, I think a lot of the times we're stretched very thin, right, as higher ed comp leaders, and so I think measurement might be one of those things that sort of falls to the wayside when we're kind of going from one, especially now, one crisis to the next. It seems every week. So what would you tell campus leaders, presidents, chancellors, vice presidents about creating sort of time and space for marketing teams to implement this framework and measurement process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shane. I would give them 2 examples of other forms of investment that require time to create a return on investment and have a way to measure. And I would say, those examples are choosing an investment advisor to manage your endowment, your institutional resources and reserves, as well as planning for a new building that might be expected to generate revenue, a conference facility or a new residence hall, for example. Both of those things require time up front to choose the right partner. In the case of a building, not only choosing the architect and the construction company, but taking the time for the design and spending money on the design phase of the process, right? And then actually executing before you ever get to the point where you can start collecting revenue. And it takes years to get that revenue to return the investment, whether it was a loan, debt, or however you paid for it. Same is true with an investment manager. They're expected to generate a level of return well above the fee that is paid to them every year. So if you're willing to take the time for those which are considered very serious management of assets at your institution, why wouldn't you treat with the same level of seriousness and the time that's required to manage one of your most valuable assets, which is your institution's brand and identity, right? And the way to do that is to spend time on this measurement piece, which will give you the opportunity to answer questions from your board, from your faculty, Senate, from students. What are we investing in marketing and communications, and what are we getting for it? If you don't have an answer to that question, or if you get the question, what should we budget for this year? Where are you going to start unless you've measured in some way what's working and what's not? That's the value of what's ahead of us with this framework.
Yeah, that's great. Great insight. And it's a great kind of analogy of this is, we think about campus buildings and things like that as assets, but as you mentioned, our brand and reputation are about as valuable an asset as we have, and we should really be investing in those. And it leads me to again, kind of circling back to the strategic importance of higher ed marketers and communicators. And I think you've mentioned this before, that importance was really elevated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I think since then there's been some good momentum at keeping that importance. But how can this framework allow our field to keep that momentum, for lack of a better term?
Well, I think, you put your finger on a place where we're able to demonstrate our value, but that value is probably most specifically demonstrated in just the strategic communications area. It's an important part of our work, and it's a regular part of our work, right? But it doesn't embody the whole of what we do. And as we think about coming out of COVID, how can you deploy what position you held by virtue of being a trusted leader who has relationships on the campus, knows how to organize in a complex environment, can help the institution all move in the same direction around a communication or a operational approach to a global pandemic? How can you transfer that to other big challenges that are ahead? In the United States, the enrollment cliff is here, and it might have accelerated a little bit by virtue of the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. And so many institutions are facing down either threats to their regular enrollment revenue, or maybe threats in their position because there are fewer students, as many as 15% fewer traditional age students kind of across the United States as a result of this drop in birth rates from a couple decades ago. You're going to have to go deeper into your applicant pool in order to get the class you want. Same thing's happening for different reasons in the UK, but we saw their admission processes go to the end, something they call clearing, where institutions and students are matched at the end. It's sort of like fraternity and sorority rush in some ways. But they had to go much later in the process in some of the most elite institutions because there was this change in the system related to the demand for higher education. And so that's going to require thinking at a really broad institutional leadership level about what should we do. And I think differentiation is a huge piece of the answer. Who knows how better to structure that than we, right? Yeah. We know how to do this. We can't make those decisions by ourselves, but in partnership with a provost and a president and a board who are thinking about the positioning of the institution. Those are big, big changes usually. Some of them, I wrote some examples in my book. Repositioning the institution is for the sake of its health long term. But in order to do that, you have to do that well with data and very careful thought about your target audiences and how your offer to those target audiences is distinctive from anybody else who's trying to, turn to the same audience. We're all looking at adult learners. We're all looking at graduate students thinking, this is going to be the answer, right? Well, if we're all there, how are we going to do that better than anybody else? It's through positioning and differentiation specifically.
Yeah, I agree. And as somebody that's been working in the graduate space, you're speaking to my heart there and thinking, how are we shifting and differentiating ourselves for a very different audience? And I just think that marketing is uniquely positioned to do that.
There's one other audience. I mean, we focused a lot on students, but I just wanted to mention that as it relates to alumni and donors specifically, the terrain is tough there as well. So people are questioning the value of philanthropy and the role of donors and generational wealth transfer. And there's this whole conversation going on about the value of philanthropy in the same way there is about the value of higher education. And that's converging in the space where people who are colleagues doing the work in development and alumni relations are really facing challenging times. And again, we have a role to play because we have data, we understand those audiences really well. We can be thinking about how to differentiate our value proposition, the exchange that the university will have to offer in return for something that the donor is looking for. And so again, our expertise will be critical in those challenges.
Yeah. Great point. And you kind of have segued into our closing question here as we wrap up our conversation. Terry, from your standpoint, you mentioned the enrollment cliff, things like public criticism of the value of higher education, obviously global issues, playing an increasingly prominent role on campuses. I'd love to hear your predictions for higher ed in general, but also higher ed marketing and communications in the next, 5 to 10 years.
Okay. So can we start with stipulating in the short term, yucky? That's a technical term.
Yucky. Okay.
Just some quick background. There are 78 countries, 40 of them democracies, who are having national elections this year. And in almost every democracy, there is a battle between the left and the right that is including this dynamic of bashing higher education because it gins up their base. That's not just happening in the United States. And guess what? There's no penalty for bashing higher education because there's no constituency that's saying, stop it. If you do that, then we will vote for you. It just doesn't happen because higher ed has never marshaled kind of political or lobbying forces, including in this country, to be able to kind of prevent that kind of dynamic. So we've got every advantage for folks in running for public office to demonize higher education at a time of a national election to gin up their base, both on the left and the right. They're ginning them up based on different things, but it's that dynamic is there. So that tells us that for this year, yucky is kind of the terrain. And I would say we should be prepared for it. We should be expecting it. We should have a mindset that is going to be particularly difficult this year. It may be less so when we're out of a national election cycle. It might tamp down a little bit. We've got a broader set of challenges that relate to this political problem, for lack of a better word, that's going to require a political solution to it. In the meantime, we can think about in our communities, both internal stakeholders and the community around us externally, what do they value about our institutions and how can we forge alliances that strengthen that? Because one of the things that comes up in all the data about polling around higher education is when you ask, do you trust or do you value higher education broadly as a sector? We've seen lots of declines from the left and the right. But when you ask, do you value X community college in my region or X university in my region, the polls go right back up because there is real value in that community resource. And students and families are still choosing higher education because they understand the value there. So there's inherently assets we have to work with. We have to think about how to leverage those in what we know is a particularly difficult period of time. But longer term, I'm bullish. I've seen things go in cycles. After 40 years, you're like, I've seen this before. And higher education is remarkably resilient. It's an institution that in one form or another has existed for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it is so because an educated citizenry is a real value in society. It's not just the individual benefit, it is the public good. And it's on that we should lean confidently and lean into.
That's great. And I'm so glad to hear that you're bullish because, with just being an admirer of yours, Terry, it's reassuring for folks, like myself that are younger in their career thinking what does the future look like? And so, and just closing out, Terry, I just want to say this has been a real treat for me, and I'm sure the same is true for our listeners. I'm an admirer of your work. I have read your book and taken the Enrollify course. So thank you for joining me and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with our listeners.
Thanks, Shane. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, Terry.
Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your hosts. Learn from Dave Builds, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.